The IDF has a special intelligence unit whose name does not exactly roll off the tongue. There's no way in a million years I could ever memorize the name of this special intelligence unit, so I'm just going to read it to you. You'll understand it's not exactly pithy. This is the name of the special intelligence unit: Terrain Analysis, Accurate Mapping, Visual Collection, and Interpretation Agency. And that special unit was discussed in a book that came out a month to the day after October 7th. This book came out on November 7th, 2023. It's written by Dan Senor and Saul Singer, and it is called The Genius of Israel. And here's why they talk about this special unit. Its job is that Israeli satellite technology, drones and airplanes and satellites, capture millions of images. And these millions of images contain themselves millions of details. And so it takes a special intelligence unit to pore over all the millions of details and the millions of images to interpret questions that are of vital strategic and existential interest for Israel. Here's the example that Saul Singer and Dan Senor give. If there is going to be a war in Lebanon, then that means that Israeli paratroopers are going to be landing in enemy territory. They're going to be in Lebanon. They're not going to be in Israel. They're going to be far away from any supply lines. The question arises, how do Israelis who are paratroopers eat and drink? How do they resupply when they are in Lebanon? So all this satellite technology has taken all these pictures of Lebanon, and those pictures are sent to this unit, and the intelligence unit has to pore over the details to figure out where is their food, where is their water, where are their essentials that Israeli paratroopers could possibly sustain themselves with. Now, there is a problem with this work, which is that it is very painstaking and tedious. Another way to put it is it's extremely boring. You have to sit for hours and hours poring over images, and it's just not for everybody. And so the question is, who's going to do this work? Because they have computers and they have algorithms, but in the end, you actually need human beings to do this and to read it. So Israel came up with a solution, and the title of the book is The Genius of Israel. And Israel's solution is pure genius. Israel decides that the soldiers who are going to fill this unit are neurodiverse. Israel fills this unit with soldiers who have autism because they have just the right skill set. They could be very, very patient. They could be very, very focused. And they have just the right smarts that enables them to interpret these pictures. And it turns out that filling intelligence units with neurodiverse young Israelis is a total win-win. It's a win for Israel and the IDF because these neurodiverse soldiers are able to interpret the data and come up with insights that saves lives. And it is a win for these soldiers and their families, as Dan Senor and Saul Singer point out, which is to say that in Israel, serving in the IDF is a badge of honor and a ticket to mainstream society. And not serving, even for legitimate reason, is stigmatizing. And this allows Israeli soldiers who would otherwise not be able to serve, doing important work with distinction and receiving the sense of being valued and needed. And more, it's just the answer to a parent's prayer. Because the authors talk about how the parents of Israelis who are autistic used to worry that state funding runs out at 21. And what's going to be when state funding runs out? How are my adult kids, young adult kids, going to support themselves? What are they going to do when they wake up in the morning? What employable skills will they have? And now these soldiers, after their term of Army service is over, have employable, importable skills of discerning big data, and they get jobs, and they have futures, and they have lives. And so this is the end of this story. The authors observe, the IDF today employs, on an absolute basis, more people with autism than any other organization in the entire world. Parents write that their child now has a future. Now, I bring up this story not only because we're always thinking about Israel, and not only because we're especially thinking about Israel on day 150 whatever of this war, but I bring up this story because it tracks a problem that our biblical ancestors, the Israelites, had back in the day, and it tracks a problem that we all have today. And that is the same problem, which is when we are in the wilderness, when we are living through a really hard time, and we are living through a really hard time, how do we build something that is beautiful and important and holy? Now, in our reading this morning, Vayakel, this obvious thing needs to be said. The Israelites did not build the tabernacle when they were at Canyon Ranch. They didn't build the tabernacle when they had a beautiful studio in a loft that had just the right light and plants. They didn't have an ample supply of green tea. They did not have lean protein at the ready. They built the tabernacle in the wilderness. They built the tabernacle when they were hungry and thirsty. They built the tabernacle when they were hot and bothered. They built the tabernacle when they were traumatized ex-slaves. They built the tabernacle when they did not know where they were going and they did not know how to get there. And they built the tabernacle in the wilderness. Another way to say it, the teaching of this Torah is that when we are in the wilderness, it's on us to figure out how to build a tabernacle. Now, the Israelites did it because they somehow found a way to summon all these gifts. And the metal workers gave metal, and the woodworkers gave wood, and the fabrics people gave fabrics. And they built a tabernacle in the wilderness. How do we do that? So there's a teaching in Pirkei Avot by a scholar that has just the best name in the world. If I was ever going to change my name from Wes Gardenswartz, I would change it to this guy's name. His name is Ben Hey. And you can't make this up. And Ben Hey is famous for the following teaching. It's 3 words, and it's a lifetime to put these 3 words together. And the good news and the bad news is that every one of us has the opportunity to do so. Here's Ben Hay's singular teaching in Pirkei Avot. 3 words. Lafum Sa'ara Agara. Lafum Sa'ara Agara, which means literally, according to the sorrow is the reward. Sa'ar is sorrow. According to the sorrow is the reward. Or, in other words, if we are in sorrow, if we are in struggle, and we have to get past that, and we're able to get past that, then the reward is all the greater. In other words, Ben Hey is asking us to do something. And here's the question that I leave you with from this sermon. When we're in sorrow, can we flip the script on our sorrow and come up with something beautiful and holy? When we're in sorrow, can we flip the script? And if we can flip the script, then we come up with a great reward. Lafun Sara Agara. I want to give you some examples, not in the space of Israel and anti-Semitism first, and then we're going to try to move Ben Hey to Israel and anti-Semitism. Here's not Israel and not anti-Semitism, just general life. This is October 6th stuff. There's a great doctor named Sherwin Newland, since passed away, who wrote a famous book called How We Die. And in the foreword to How We Die, this big doctor, Sherwin Newland, explains why he became a doctor in the first place and how he became a doctor in the first place. And the answer is Ben Hey. The answer is Lafun Sara Agara. He tells the story that when he was a young boy, his mother was very, very sick. And it turns out that she would die very young when he was very young. And he flipped the script on sorrow because even as a young boy, he saw the role that her doctors played in seeing her and tending to her and making her and his dad and the family feel seen and valued. And he resolved, as a young boy whose mother was dying and then died, that what I want to do when I grow up, I want to be a doctor so that I can do for other families what these doctors did for my family. That is flipping the script on sorrow. So we don't stay in sorrow, we figure out how to get to reward. Here's a few other examples. You get fired. You lose your job because you get fired. And the literature makes this clear. This is just one of the most horrific things. This is like right up there with death. And then the question is, I wouldn't have picked it, I wouldn't have chosen it, but now that it has happened, can I write a new chapter that is going to be filled with a different kind of meaning that would have never happened if I hadn't been fired? But now that I'm fired, I'm writing this new chapter. That's Lafum Sara Agara, flipping the script on our sorrow. Or we don't get fired, we just retire. And now we have time on our hands. Turns out we have a lot of time on our hands. Turns out we have maybe too much time on our hands. Can we flip the script and figure out how we can use that time and devote it to some cause that is worthy and large and important, where we can strengthen something we believe in? Last example, loneliness. We just feel alone. We just feel lonely. Is there some way we can flip the script on that sorrow? And the pang of loneliness inspire us to get up, and the pang of loneliness inspire us to get out, and the pang of loneliness inspire us to build and strengthen relationships so that we feel connection. Ben Hey tells us everybody has tsa'ar. Can we flip the script on our sorrow so that somehow we can come to a better place of reward? Now, how does this apply to what we've all been thinking about for 5 months? So I want to tell you a story, and the story has a coda, and then there is a coda to the coda. The story involves a young 22-year-old Israeli named Ben Zussman, who fell in battle in Gaza at the age of 22. And when I read this, that Ben Zussman had died, it literally took my breath away. And actually, I first shared that with the congregation when we were trying to mobilize the mitzvah mission that we ended up taking in February. And the reason that it hit me so hard, I didn't know Ben Zussman, but I knew Ben Zussman's great-grandfather, Ben Zussman. after whom the great-grandson Ben Zussman was named. And it just struck me that in these two words, Ben Zussman, you can see all the difference between what it means to live as an American Jew and what it means to live and die as an Israeli Jew. So Ben Zussman and Bernice, the great-grandparents, lived in Denver, Colorado. Ben Zussman was the owner of a burlap bag factory. He was very, very prosperous, and he was very, very generous. And he lived in West Denver, the corner of 17th and Zenobia, right opposite Sloan's Lake. He was my parents' biggest customer at Utica Grocery. And he used to order food that he did not need, just to support my mom and dad. And as a kid, I grew up delivering groceries to Ben Zussman and Bernice Zussman, the great-grandparents of Ben Zussman, the fallen soldier. And that's what it means to live in America, especially when they did. They lived during the golden age of American Jewry, and therefore, they were able to live to a good, ripe age, old and contented. And they died at home, in their home at 17th and Zenobia, opposite Sloan's Lake. And they died in bed, and they died surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, which is what happens if you get to live into your 80s and 90s and are blessed to have progeny. That's what it was like to be Ben Zussman, American Jew. Ben Zussman, the great-grandson, had a different reality. He lived in Israel, which meant that he faced a world of extreme meaning, extreme purpose, extreme value to savor every single day, and also extreme sacrifice and self-sacrifice. He finished his service a few days before October the 7th. And when October the 7th happened, Ben Zussman, 22, he said, "I'm serving." He wasn't called. He served without being called. And he fell in battle. That's the story. But there is a coda to the story. On his way to the front lines in Gaza, he ended up writing a letter to his parents. And this is what he writes, I quote, "I'm writing you this message on the way to the base. If you're reading this, something must have happened to me. Even if something happens to me, I don't allow you to sink into sorrow. I had the zechus to fulfill my mission. You can be sure that I'm looking down on you and smiling a huge smile. If chas v'chalila, you're sitting shiva, transform it into a week of friends, family, and fun. There should be food, fleishik, of course, beers, sweet drinks, nuts, tea, and of course, Ima's cookies. Make jokes, hear stories, meet all of my friends that you haven't met yet. I'm jealous of you. I would have liked to sit there and see everyone. I'll say it again. I left home without even being called up to the reserves. If I need to die, halavai, it will happen while defending others and our country." That's the coda. There's a coda to the coda. When I was in Israel with our group last month, I was talking to Micha Goodman about his new book. It's coming out right before Pesach. It's about Israel after the war. It's about the whole question of tomorrow. What will tomorrow be when the war is over? So I said to Micha, wow, what a book and how needed. Are you dedicating it to anybody? And he said, yes. And I asked, who are you dedicating the book to? And he said, to Ben Zussman. And I said, Ben Zussman, do you know Ben Zussman? He knows Ben Zussman, and he knows Ben Zussman's parents. And I told him about my connection to Ben Zussman's great-grandparents, the great-grandfather Ben Zussman and Bernice. And I said to him, why are you dedicating your new book to Ben Zussman? And he said, because Ben Zussman epitomizes the very best in the spirit of Israel. Now, we live here, we don't live there. We live in America, we don't live in Israel. Our children and our grandchildren, they're not called to make that sacrifice. But we, make no mistake about it, we're living in a wilderness right now. We're living in the throes of very, very, very hard times for the Jewish people. And our Torah tells us what we're supposed to do when we're in the wilderness. And that is build a tabernacle. Shabbat Shalom.